Learn how to write Monday in calligraphy, starting with brush pen calligraphy. In this example here, I've color-coded each time you lift your pen for a different stroke, and we're going to use a brush pen for this. So this brush pen that I'm using is a Pentel brush pen. There are different kinds of Pentel pens, so you want to make sure that you're getting the actual brush pen kind, which is linked in the description below. And this is a favorite brush pen, especially for beginners. You use heavier pressure on your downstrokes and lighter pressure on your upstrokes to create this contrast between thick and thin. And this is how you can write Monday in brush pen calligraphy. Next, I'll show you how to do faux calligraphy to get this calligraphy look using a regular pen. So we're going to start by just writing the whole word in mono weight script. So you can use any pen for this. Probably a thicker pen will be better than a super thin one, especially if you're writing kind of big. Or if you only have a really thin pen, then you might want to write the letters a little bit smaller, like shorter. Okay, so step 1, write the whole word in monoline. And then step 2, we're going to go back in and create these thick strokes. And there is a certain spot that these thick strokes go. It's on your downstrokes. So you can kind of hover over what you've drawn. This was an upstroke and this was a downstroke. So I'm going to thicken this stroke here by adding a second line on all of the downstrokes. And the more you practice this, the more you kind of get into a rhythm. It's really fun and calming to just do faux calligraphy. And the cool thing is you can do it with any pen or like chalk or paint pens. So it's very versatile. Okay, and then you could either leave it like this, or you could go in at the end and fill in all of these gaps that you've created to make it look like this calligraphy. Okay, and lastly, I'll show you how you can create block capital letters using a brush pen. So here we're just going to make our letters a little bit shorter. So instead of making them as tall as this M, they're going to be as tall as the short letters, the lowercase letters. And I'm going to use the brush pen for the same idea, thick downstrokes, thin upstrokes. Now the first letter M, we're going to start this at the baseline and come up, then down, up, down, so that these two pieces are the thick strokes. I tend to make these capital letters more at an upright angle instead of slanted like calligraphy. Oh, you may notice the N also starts at the baseline and comes up, down, up. And same with the A, we're going to start at the baseline so that this first piece is thin, like rather than doing an A that looks like that, you want it to look like this. Like you can do it however you want, but this is the quote correct way to do it for the A. Okay, and that is how you can write Monday in capital letters using a brush pen. Let's do Monday in bounce lettering now using the Procreate app on the iPad. So in bounce lettering, we make certain parts of the letters more exaggerated, either up or down, or the size of them. For example, this piece of the N goes up and down higher than it normally would. You can also play with the loop of the D and make it, instead of making it a straight stem like this, having it as an open loop. Add some more character. And then the Y is a good spot to add some character as well. Maybe you can do a little bit of a flourish like this just to make it a little different. So that's one way you could do Monday in bounce lettering.
Now let's write Monday in Copperplate. So the paper that I'm using here is a marker paper. It's Canson marker paper, and I have it over a printed guide sheet where I can see through to the guidelines. So the majuscule M is done starting with an upstroke, then a downstroke that has a swell in it, another upstroke, and then finally another downstroke, making sure it's along the slant. The slant in Copperplate is 55-degree angle, and using the guide sheet that you can kind of see through my paper helps keep the angle consistent. It also helps keep the X height consistent, which is the height of the lowercase letters. And consistency is really important when you're practicing a script like Copperplate. So for example, I'm trying to make all of my ovals the same. So you'll see an oval in the O, in the D, and then also in the A. Now mine are not perfectly equal. I can see here that there's a little bit of variation. The O was a little bit narrow. This one was a little bit wider. So consistency is something you can always work on. You can also aim to keep your thicknesses. So when I'm pressing down, that creates the thick line. Keep the thickness constant throughout. I can see that on my downstroke of my descending stem loop in the Y here, it was a little bit inconsistent. But if you try to keep your shade consistent throughout the word, it will just help it look more uniform. I'm going to add a big flourish on the stem by just kind of spiraling around and adding an extra curve. So normally the first stem of an M would be drawn in the upward direction, but when you add flourishes, sometimes the direction changes and also the area that is shaded can change. Now with the actual flourishes themselves, you can shade them or you can leave them thin lines. So you'll notice like in this flourish off of the N, I left it thin. Or you can add shading. But you just want to make sure that the shades are not any heavier than the shades that are on the letters, because that would make it a little bit harder to read. Okay, so right here I might add a flourish coming off of the N, but I'm not exactly sure yet. So I'm just going to leave it like this and then come back to it. Now here for the D, I'm going to show you, you can go right into a flourish that connects right into the letter by just adding a loop. We're keeping all the base letter forms the same as usual. We're just adding flourishes in areas where it makes sense. So now I'm just kind of testing out where do I want to place a flourish here. I could add something coming off of the N, or I could fill in some of the space with the Y. I think I'm just going to do that. I'm going to make this Y loop come out a little bit to the left here and fill in some of that space. So then in this case, I could have come down here with a flourish, but I think I'm just going to connect it back up to the D right there. Now, to be completely honest, I don't actually love how this M looks. I feel like this loop over here is just a little bit too tall because it's almost the height of the letter. It's almost 3 spaces tall. I don't actually love the angle of this curve, so I'm just going to try another M over here just to see what it would look like if I try again. Make the loop a little bit shorter. And then for this next part, instead of keeping it so high up on the letter, I'm going to try to cross it down a little bit lower and maybe finish right there. And then on this last piece, I don't like how I added so much shading so far below here. So I'm going to try to taper my shading a little bit sooner, and then also just looking in the context of the word, I might be able to add more of a flourish coming off of this part. Maybe something like that. And then I could go in and write the rest of the word. I decided to add another flourish at the end of the Y right here to add another curve to balance it out. I think looking back at the original version, I like how this one has a little bit more lift with the ends of these flourishes kind of coming up more, even at the end here. But I just wanted to show you that there's not just one way to do it. You can always try again if there's something that you don't like about it. Also, using pencil is a really good way to plan it out. So I did have it planned out over on the side here, and I kind of followed my plan, but then I also ended up changing it a little bit. So my original plan was to flourish the N, but instead I decided to flourish on the bottom of the M. And then I also, instead of doing a more complex flourish at the end of the Y, I just decided to keep it a little bit more simple. Now let's write Monday in Spencerian on the iPad. We're going to start with an indirect oval here. So instead of, usually an oval in calligraphy is made in this direction, but an indirect oval is drawn in the opposite direction. And in the M, it starts with the indirect oval that has shading right here in the bottom part of the stem. And then the rest of the M is thin. Now Spencerian is a lot quicker to write because the letters are connected together with more of a flow, kind of like in cursive, and you don't have to lift your pen as often. Now for the Y, in Sunday, I shaded this portion right here. In Monday, I'm going to actually keep that part thin, and just to show you a different version, you can shade on the bottom of the stem, on the bottom of the loop right there. So the shade is here instead of here, and usually letters are only shaded one time. Now in looking at the balance of this, there should be just a little bit more shading here on the M. Ideally, I would have done this right the first time, but you can always go back and touch things up. This brush is actually very pressure sensitive, so if I were to press down as hard as possible, I could get a really thick shade like this. I naturally have a lighter hand, which is why I designed it this way, because I wanted to get these shades without having to press really hard. So this is the width of the shade that I want, but it just makes it a little bit harder to be consistent because I need to be adding the same amount of pressure each time.
Thanks for watching our series on how to write the days of the week in calligraphy. Let us know in the comments which style is your favorite, and check out the blog post at lovelyloops.com to see pictures of all of these styles, as well as more helpful tips and free resources. Thanks again, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.